Well, I'm not going to have that in there. You don't want to cough. So let me...
I know.
You are listening to Provel Politics. This is a special type of episode today. My co-host Maggie is out on assignment in South Carolina, so she's gone. But to take her place, we have friend of the show, Sophie Lotus.
Hi.
So, if it works out, great. If not, you won't even hear this episode, so it doesn't even matter. But we're just going to get started with our big idea of the day, which is our own Senator, Josh Hawley, and what he's been up to, but more importantly, where he came from, where we think he's going, and...
He's going straight to the White House.
Oh, I mean, maybe. So, let me start off with like where Josh Hawley even came from, because a lot of people don't know. He's like from a Kansas City suburb. It's called Lexington. He went to Rockhurst, this private Jesuit boys' school, $14,000 tuition. He went to Stanford. He went to Yale. He clerked for a Supreme Court justice. He came back to Missouri only a couple years ago. He started teaching at Mizzou. And he was involved in the Hobby Lobby case from years ago, where Hobby Lobby sued for their right to deny women reproductive health care under their insurance plans. And you can imagine what side of the lawsuit he was on. And he was successful in that lawsuit. And through that victory, he went on to kind of have a career on the conservative speaking circuit around Missouri. He went to a lot of like evangelical universities and Southern Baptist conventions, and was very popular. He was on Glenn Beck's network, The Blaze. And at some point, he decided that he could have a political career, and he ran for Attorney General in 2015 against Kurt Schaefer, who was a pretty well-established Republican in the General Assembly, pretty well-known, not by any means moderate, very conservative guy, and seemed to be the next person in line to be Attorney General. But Josh Hawley had a lot of money come into his campaign from people like Richard Olhein, who is a Illinois businessman who also donated to Roy Moore, and David Humphreys of Tamco in Springfield, who has backed a lot of right-to-work initiatives in this state and others. And Josh Hawley won that race, and then he ended up winning the general election. And of course, as Attorney General, he did a spotty job.
Yeah, spotty's the right word.
And now he's our U.S. Senator. Did I miss anything?
No.
No. So, what are your thoughts about the future of Josh Hawley? Where is he going, and what is he doing right now that would lead you to believe what you believe?
I think he's going straight to the White House, whether that's on a vice presidential ticket because he's young, so he could balance somebody out, or what's more likely is he's going as president because he has the conservative values, he has the religious background that everybody wants, he's taking on big tech, he's really able to go anywhere and spin it to look like he's the good guy. He went down to the border.
Oh, yeah.
And, yeah, challenged liberals to come down, and then said that he saw children who were terrorized by human traffickers, which is why the children were in cages and not the human traffickers.
What concerns me the most about him is I thought that what he was doing was an act, but it is not an act. It is completely genuine, and that is just who he is, which is a lot more concerning than if it were an act. Because if it's an act, I get it, it's political theater, but the Riverfront Times recently published a piece of a letter he wrote to an editor when he was 14, where he sounded essentially the same as he does now, like completely the same. He talked about declining moral values and crime and that we've lost our way as a society. And so, like, this is just who he is. And for years, I think people have been trying to figure out what would Trumpism look like if it was led by a more competent politician. And for a while, people were like, oh, well, maybe it would be like Ted Cruz, who was the runner-up in 2016, or Marco Rubio, who was called the next president of the United States on Time magazine, I think in 2010 during the Tea Party wave, or Tom Cotton, this kind of Mothman from Arkansas who wants us to go to a war with Iran. But no, it's Josh Hawley, who is dangerous because when people who are like wrong 99% of the time get one thing right, it gives a lot of credibility to all the things that they're wrong about that may speak to like the id that exists within people. You know what I mean?
Well, also, think about what 14-year-old hasn't changed their opinions at some point in time. And so what's also scary about Josh Hawley is he's essentially still a 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
He's, what, 39?
He's our youngest senator at 39.
He's our youngest senator, and he's 39, and he has the same beliefs he had when he was 14 years old.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
What concerns me, really, he is so young, so he could be president or vice president in 2024, because I think the easiest way for that to happen would be, I don't know, Joe Biden beats Donald Trump this time, midterms don't go so hot, then Josh Hawley beats him in 2024 or something. But even if that weren't to happen, because Josh Hawley has the background that he has, he's on the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, I could easily see him being a Supreme Court justice, which would be its own can of worms, because that means we would never stop hearing about Josh Hawley.
Well, and he'd get to do his fundamentally just wrong view of history on any topic that he so desired. Like, this man was a history major.
Yeah.
Does not know, I think, or retained anything he learned that did not agree with him.
I'm sure he was the kid in class who said that affirmative action is racist towards white people.
Are we sure he's not on record?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Anyway.
that sounds like a Josh Hawley quote.
What's curious is that he's been able to come this far given the strife he went through in 2018 with our former governor, Eric Greitens, when a lot of conservatives I know would characterize it as Josh Hawley threw Eric Greitens under the bus during Eric Greitens' troubles. There was a point where the governor put out a restraining order on Josh Hawley, and they had a pretty public back and forth. But somehow he's been able to recover. Every young Republican I know loves Josh Hawley, and I don't know. I guess he's just someone to keep an eye on.
I think it's because he stayed in the spotlight, and Greitens ultimately lost that battle and is now hiding somewhere.
We'll talk about that a little later. Maybe he's not hiding. Maybe he's
not.
coming out of hiding.
But
yeah.
Hawley still had his position, and Hawley still had the spotlight. And for the man's many, many, many faults, he knows how to spin an event, and he knows how to spin a story.
Goodness. Well, this is going to be a pretty Missouri-heavy episode, which I think is good because you kind of get caught up talking about all the interesting things that are happening nationally. And speaking of like rising stars within parties, on the other side, there's Jason Kander, who has been busy doing what exactly?
So he dropped out of the Kansas City mayoral race for treatment for his PTSD, and now he's back with a new project, and it's to work for an organization trying to find homes for veterans, which is really cool. He's the leader of the Kansas City Expansion Project, and they're trying to expand even more. So he's got a new mission, he's back making headlines, and he's back doing public events, which means probably, hopefully, in my opinion, he'll run for something again.
I hope he runs for something. I am a little concerned, though, that we keep looking for Jason Kander to fix our problems. You know, there is no white knight. There's no one who's going to save us. And I think we're putting a lot of pressure on Jason Kander, and that's maybe why he had a recurrence of his emotional distress when he was running for mayor of Kansas City. When Claire McCaskill went on David Axelrod's podcast after losing to Josh Hawley, she talked about now wanting to run for Senate and trying to recruit Jason Kander a number of times to run instead of her, but he wouldn't go for it. And I hope Jason Kander is doing what's best for him at this moment, because I can't imagine what it must feel like to have the weight of an entire party on your shoulders. Because it wasn't that long ago we were saying maybe he'll run for president.
Right, and if all Jason Kander does for the rest of his life is veterans homelessness and posting great photos of his new dog and his wife and his kid, I will be happy, because when he was Secretary of State, he did a lot. He's done a lot for the party already, He's given us a lot of incredible memories, like the gun control ad.
Oh.
And I think that's what the Democratic Party keeps doing, is putting young stars up front and watching them get smashed to pieces and then going, well, you weren't strong enough, this is your fault, here's the next young thing.
I mean, like, you could just list them off: Stacey Abrams, Andrew Gillum, John Ossoff, remember that from way back when, Jason Kander, and so many others, because I think there's just a fundamental problem with organization in the Democratic Party that leads to some of these losses, because these are, fundamentally good candidates. Jason Kander probably would have beat Roy Blunt if not for a couple extenuating circumstances, and maybe he would have beat Josh Hawley, but we'll never know.
Well,
Well,
2024 maybe.
yeah. But speaking of, yeah, oh my goodness, the it's like the World Series that was the Royals and the well, actually no, because they're both from Kansas City, but they're both Missouri. It all works out. It's all the same. The metaphor is solid. But speaking of young veteran Democratic rising stars, there was another who was with Jason Kander in Kansas City, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's running for president. He held a fundraiser, and I have feelings about Mayor Pete, but what are your thoughts on Mayor Pete before I get into some of the details of this fundraiser?
I liked Mayor Pete, as everyone I think did, until you started digging deeper into his record. He really, I think, suffered from being a part-time mayor because
Oof.
he didn't have enough time, he didn't have enough resources, and some of it is he's so nakedly ambitious that I hate to say it, but I don't think he really cares about all of the issues that he says he does. I think he's putting on a front to try and run, and I think he did that in South Bend. I think we see a lot of issues when it comes to diversity in his campaign, when it comes to him trying to appeal more diverse, because I don't think he actually cares about doing that. I think he just wants to appear that way so he can get the votes.
A lot of tough takes on Mayor Pete just then. None that I would disagree with wholeheartedly. First, just to talk about why he was in Kansas City, he was with the mayor-elect Quentin Lucas and Jason Kander to talk about veterans issues, because he is a veteran, and then later on he had a fundraiser. I think it was $100 a plate, and in some of his events it costs a couple $100s to get a photograph with him. And his campaign has had a problem with taking big money from PACs and corporate donors and so on. And Mayor Pete, I have no love for Mayor Pete. I also, for a brief moment, thought, maybe this is going to be my guy. But he has this unique talent of talking without really saying anything. I listened to him give an answer on Israel-Palestine that went on for 7 minutes that left me no more knowledgeable than I was at the beginning of the answer. And as well, he's just not really where I am on the issues. He's not for Medicare for all. He's not for free public college, and he's very articulate. He can speak a lot of languages, but I think a lot of the support he gets is elitist in a way, because his appeal seems to be that he's quote unquote smart, and that's not really an electoral strategy or like an ideological thing. That's just he went to the right schools and he looks good on television, and maybe I'm being too dismissive of him, but it seems like his talent is that he's good at giving job interviews, and it's not really it.
And some of his problem with the money is he was a mayor before this. He has no name recognition, so he has to do all this stuff to try and bump it up. But in a campaign where most candidates are making headlines for not taking money from PACs, when you start taking big money, you're going to be in the headlines, but not for the right reasons.
And maybe we should ask why this guy has not had a position, anything between mayor and president. Like, is there a reason? I know Indiana's like a pretty red state, but there could be a reason why he has not been elected to anything else in Indiana other than small town mayor.
I mean, if he thinks he can run for president in a country that did vote for Trump, then he has to. Why didn't you try that in Indiana?
But I don't know that he's necessarily even running for president. He ran for DNC chair after Hillary lost in 2016 to drop out before the balloting began. and I think that was just to build name recognition. And I could see him looking. I think he may be running for vice president. I wouldn't put him on any ticket, but you know, a lot of the support he gets are from college-educated white people, and that could be a base of support you want later on when you're looking for campaign donations or you're looking at down ballot things like the House and the Senate, and maybe he could be helpful in that. But honestly, if I could just not hear from Mayor Pete again, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. I might be being too harsh.
I mean, I don't follow Mayor Pete. I follow his husband on Twitter.
Oh, Chasten is great.
Chasten is out here. He should be running the campaign. Chasten's out here having Teacher Talk Tuesdays, which are my favorite thing. Like, Chasten's a real one.
What?
Mayor Pete,
no.
Sketchy.
Like, I appreciate his work with veterans. That's all well and good. But, I have heard people make the point, and now I do think about it is, what does that say about someone who joins the military while George W. Bush is president? What is that about? I've heard that point made several times, and I've only now started to think about that deeply. What does that? Why? Like, he sees what's happening on the news, he sees, like, Abu Ghraib and whatnot, and he goes, that's what I want to do. Anywho, still staying on Missouri, we have a governor's race coming up. Mike Parson has not stated whether or not he's going to run for a full term yet. We expect him to. He's got $3 million in the bank. He's raised $750,000 in the last year. But there are a couple things that could complicate it for him. And I want your thoughts on this first one. Eric Greitens has refiled his paperwork for the upcoming primary. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's running, but he has updated the paperwork so that he can raise money. What do we do if Eric Greitens runs again?
I'd like to say that we would treat his campaign with all of the seriousness that it deserves, and that we bring up every single thing that happened when he was governor, and not just the scandals, but the fact that he cut education money, that he did all of this stuff with the Board of Education that no one agreed with. He removed people from the board who then got reinstated under Parsons. But I know Missouri, he did the right thing. He went and stayed low, and now the story's gone, and we all hate Kim Gardner now because she's always in the news. So if he comes back, it's going to be like he's, resurrected, and he's the good one, and everything that happened will be forgotten, probably.
Well, conservatives are going to have a point that they're going to make, which is because Kim Gardner's being investigated and because we had that FBI investigator indicted for perjury or something to that effect, and all these other things, that it was a witch hunt and Eric Greitens got a raw deal and he shouldn't have resigned and he was run out of town by the establishment. And some of those things can be true. I mean, he was run out of town by the establishment. It's not a secret that most people in Jefferson City did not like Eric Greitens because he ran a campaign on calling most of them corrupt and ineffective. That's not really how you make friends. However, he still did defraud a charity and allegedly sexually assault a woman and also not reveal the name of his dark money donors. So none of all of these things can exist in the same world and be true. And I'm not sure that he's going to run for governor because of the fact that there are so many people in the Capitol that don't like him. I think maybe he'll run against Roy Blunt in 2022, and he's just raising money for that right now. Or maybe he's just in the wilderness. I mean, he's supposed to be going back to the Middle East in the Navy to find himself.
Which does not seem like a good idea
at
all. I think going back to the place that probably gave you some of your violent impulses is not what you would want to do if you're trying to find yourself. I would suggest maybe getting some therapy.
What about those ads where he had that 1,000-yard stare and shot a machine gun into the lake, said that he's an unstable individual?
All of it?
All of it. But he was cool. I mean, he rappelled down from a ceiling into a rodeo. Remember that?
Oh.
Can you see Mike Parson doing that? No, you can't. Exactly. Re-elect Eric Greitens.
Do I want my governor to be rebellious?
Do you want your governor to be cool? Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, it is Missouri. It might be a better reputation.
But in addition to the complications that could be posed by Eric Greitens, Nicole Galloway is allegedly thinking of running for governor. she hasn't announced yet, but all of her staff, including some people I know, have said that she's going to do it. She's out taking calls, trying to raise funds, and so could Nicole Galloway beat Mike Parson, do we think, in 2020?
I don't think so, just because after Mike Parsons has some of the best optics in Missouri right now, in that he came in after Greitens, he reinstated the people Greitens got off the education board. He did a lot to cement himself with the establishment while also continuing Greitens' policies. So everything we didn't like about Greitens, Parsons didn't have. Everything Missouri did like about him, he continued to do. And it's going to be really hard to get Missouri to go back to being blue when we went for Trump for 19 points. We have Josh Hawley, which is probably going to be the new face of the Republican Party.
And Donald Trump will be coming the campaign.
Yes. Donald Trump knows we're one of the states that he can go when he needs to boost his ego. And that's going to be hard for any Democrat to win anything in.
I'm not sure if she can win. I don't know. I know that, Mike Parsons got on the good side of a lot of people by virtue of not being Eric Greitens. However, it might have been a bridge too far for a lot of, suburban people, the abortion bill that went through. And in addition to that, he has taken up a lot of Republican ideas in ignoring the will of the people when they vote on a referendum. They're still trying to pass right to work, which failed 2-1 in this state, in rural counties and in urban counties. They're still trying to undermine Clean Missouri. They're doing what they can to undermine the minimum wage increase. And at some point you would think that something's got to give, because this state is fairly socially conservative, but it is somewhat fiscally liberal in the sense that, we did vote for Donald Trump, but at the same time, minimum wage increase, because there is an appreciation, I think, for unions and for economic policies that help working class people. And because Mike Parson has been on the side of business, it's just hard to know, though, because you don't really know what people value when they vote. I know I'm not going to vote for Mike Parson.
I am not either.
For all of the above and a lot of other reasons, but, what is like a factory worker in Nevada, Missouri thinking, or like a hog farmer in the Northeast? I don't know.
I think Nicole Galloway has a lot of pieces that if she can pull together, she can maybe pull off the win. If she gets the unions, if she gets women, and women who are on the fence about abortion but know that this bill goes too far, if she can pull all of these different coalitions together, then maybe, and that's also banking on Parson thinking that he has an easy race and not pulling his coalition together, which the odds of all of that happening are
pretty low,
but there's still a percentage there.
It's not zero. And a year is a long time. Anything could happen. Mike Parson may not even be governor next year. I can tell you that in May of 2017, I still expected Eric Greitens to be governor in May of 2018, and call me the fool. So I guess we'll just see, but let's transition to a more national picture. There was something that happened yesterday. It took a lot out of my day to watch it all. In hindsight, maybe I wouldn't have dedicated so much time to the first half of it had I known that the second half was going to be more worth watching, and I'm talking about the Mueller testimony. I don't even know where to begin on this. So let's talk about Mueller's performance. A lot of Democrats were disappointed because I guess they were expecting Mueller to be, I don't know, some kind of media creature or like James Comey and have these snappy answers to questions from the Congress people, but he was pretty slow. He didn't answer a lot of questions. He didn't know some of the answers to some questions, and he couldn't hear very well, and he looked kind of old on stage, and it was not, I don't think, what a lot of people were expecting. But honestly, it was kind of what I was expecting, because you look at Robert Mueller and he's like, Northern Virginia bureaucrat. He brings his potato salad to the Episcopalian barbecue. He owns 25 ties, but he only wears 4. One of them is for the Christmas party. He's He's just kind of like a boring older guy, and I don't know what we were expecting. And now the president is calling it a victory. Democrats are saying it was a victory because he's confirmed some things. But honestly, I don't think any of this will matter. Maybe you have a different thought. Do you think there's anything that Mueller has said or could say that'll end up mattering?
No, because I think Mueller's whole job, that he sees it as, is to not matter. He did the investigation. He said the report was going to speak for itself. It didn't, because I think the Democrats still want something out of him. And the problem is, no one is going to tell the Democrats to impeach Donald Trump except the Democrats.
Yeah.
But they don't want that responsibility. But Mueller's not going to sit there in front of Congress and say, impeach Donald Trump. That's not his job.
He's not going to lean into the microphone and go, impeach.
Yeah.
That's what we were waiting for 6 hours, apparently. It didn't happen.
No, that's not what he sees as his job. He gave us the report. If Democrats find the report, which I think there's a lot also besides the report that would say impeach him, but they want somebody to tell them because they want absolution. And the problem is it's a big political move, and they have to either do it and deal with the consequences or not do it and deal with the same consequences.
Yeah. I think we put way too many eggs in the Mueller basket. Just because, Donald Trump is like a cartoonishly corrupt individual, and you could look at any number of things and probably have a case for impeachment. Like, he's a tax avoider. He is clearly violating a lot of ethics and just regulations that are supposed to apply to the executive branch. I mean, he has mob connections from New York. I couldn't even go into all the things that he has done that is probably illegal because there are so many that I just cannot remember. But for whatever reason, we decided to focus in on the Russia scandal, and I get why. But also, I think it speaks to this kind of psychosis that is affecting some of us, because we shouldn't want the Russia thing to be true, because in a perfect world, your president wouldn't be colluding with a foreign power. But I think some of us want it to be true, because then it explains away this traumatic event that doesn't make sense, which is Donald Trump becoming president.
Well, and it absolves people from having to deal with the racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia that led to his election. If we can go, oh, it was Russia, then nobody has to look too deeply at their own role in this.
And it absolves the Democratic Party of looking at any failures they might have had during the campaign. Because if it was all Russia, well then, we won this fair and square. And I'm not, of course, there was Russian interference and clearly conspiracy between Donald Trump and the Russians, but I just think that we built this up higher than it could have ever been, because we really wanted it to be true, or at least some of us did. But it looks like going forward, we're going to have to focus on something else. Maybe, I don't know, the electoral process, because we're kind of running down the clock on this term.
I was going to say children are in camps. That might be something that maybe we should be dedicating more time to. 6 children have died, this
The children
year.
are in concentration camps on the border.
And that is not grounds for at least entertaining impeachment. That's not grounds for massive, ethics lawsuits. We're not actively we're letting Congress go to work every single day without dealing with this. But 6 hours of Mueller testimony that's going to be news for weeks.
I mean, we are on the verge of several wars with Iran and Venezuela and God knows where else.
I'm sure we'll find out.
But you know what? Bob Mueller's there, and did he wink at the camera? I don't know. Is he sending a message? Who knows? I don't know. But not to dismiss the importance of that investigation, because it's about 400 or so pages, and I read a good portion of it because I had to for a school assignment. There's definitely cause for impeachment in whatever he found, and the only reason that it's not going through is because the speaker does not want to go forward with that. And last episode I talked about why that's, I think, not a great idea, because the example they like to use in the 90s of Bill Clinton and there was backlash, well, that parallel doesn't really work out. Donald Trump is at 42% approval. When we started impeaching Bill Clinton, he was in the high 50s. Donald Trump has never been near 50, not even during the election. The Republicans in that following midterm they lost a couple seats, but they didn't lose their congressional majority. And then a couple years later, they elected George Bush. So if the consequence to impeaching Donald Trump is that we may win an election, oh boy.
Right. I think impeachment has to happen, whether it's politically advantageous at this moment or not, because for America, which is the argument Republicans like to use all the time, is that we're doing this not for our own good, but for America. And the problem is the Democrats do, I would say, more for America as an institution than the Republicans are doing, but they never spin it that way because it's the Republicans. So if we impeach Donald Trump for the good of America because of the wars we're going to avoid, the ethics charges that need to be brought and need to be ended, then maybe we don't win 2020. But maybe down the line, there's a greater victory than one election. Maybe we win the election. We don't know.
We don't know.
Because we won't do it.
Who knows? But just one last thing about Mueller. I'm just kind of a little disheartened by the whole thing because, you know, even if he was a little off his game, didn't look the best. 6 hours of testimony, I thought there was a lot of good information out there, and I think it's kind of unreasonable to ask like a single prosecutor, even if he was in charge of the entire investigation, to just, you know, talk about 400 pages of text and just be able to refer to it with 5-minute questioning periods, because it's a lot to know. And he isn't like James Comey in the sense that he's not just kind of playing it by ear and, you know, going on these monologues about democracy and the good of the republic, because he is literally just a North Virginia lawyer who...
Mueller has no political agenda.
No.
He's up there. And think about how much...
He's not going to write a book.
Right. Think about how much research went into that 400-page report that did not even make it. So he's got 400 pages that he can be asked questions on. He's got all of these months and months of research that he can be asked questions on, and he's up there for 6 hours. And we're expecting him to be a rock star because we expect our politics to be entertaining.
There's only one 74-year-old rock star, and his name is Mick Jagger. And so, well, there might be others. Paul McCartney. Okay, not the point.
The point is, it's not Bob Mueller.
It's not Bob Mueller. Moving on, Puerto Rico turmoil. Donald Trump would say this is international news because he doesn't consider Puerto Rico part of America, but as we know, it is a territory, and so it is still in the national sphere.
They have a member that sits in on the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
They're very much part.
They pay taxes. They can't vote in federal elections.
They cannot.
They have a voice in the primary, but their governor has announced that he's going to resign on the 2nd of August. There have been hundreds of thousands of people protesting in the streets. And what was the impetus of this entire controversy?
So a bunch of text messages came out from the governor making light of the Hurricane Maria situation where...
What?
Yeah, you would think political leaders, especially when your own people are dying and you're not receiving federal aid, would be a little kinder to what's going on.
It's
but
like if Mitch Landrieu would have sent out a bad tweet about Hurricane Katrina. Like, what?
Right, like, and it wasn't even just that it mocked the situation, it made fun of people who were dead or dying. And he did all of this from an air-conditioned community center, so he didn't actually suffer what the rest of the population suffered, but he got to make fun of it.
Yeah.
And so all of those leaked, and people started protesting, and he wasn't going to resign. Now, thank goodness he's resigning. August 2nd. This is a major win for Puerto Rico and for organizations and activists who really put this together.
I heard he also, said some pretty racist and misogynist things in his exchanges with other government officials, and he threatened the mayor of San Juan, who is a notable enemy of Donald Trump. And I think solely because of that last part, that's why Donald Trump has been sending out messages of support on Twitter towards the governor of Puerto Rico, despite him being a Democrat. If you hate who Donald Trump hates, then you're a good guy.
Right, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Oh, yeah. So that's happening, and I don't know who would replace him. I guess there would be a lieutenant governor in Puerto Rico.
So I don't have the name, but I did when I was coming into work today. There is already some backlash against whoever's coming in. But I think that's going to happen with any transition. The problem is because it was not only the governor sending these text messages, there were other people in it. If any of those people are anywhere close to power, then you still have the same problem of that person's not going to respect Puerto Rican lives, culture, everything that happened. And they're still not recovered entirely from Hurricane Maria, which is a whole nother issue that we can blame the president for.
Well, you know, there's someone out of all this who's gotten really lucky because, and that person is Ralph Northam, because he thought he was going to have the year as the worst Democratic governor in America for you-know-what. But now he's been beaten out by Puerto Rico. You didn't think it could happen, but it's happened.
Although Donald Trump would still say he's the worst governor in America.
Still the worst.
Puerto Rico is, not
Puerto
America.
Rico's not America. And that's why, I'm not going to say that, that's terrible. You know what he said. So we're going to go international, and then we're going to, at the end of this, come back to what's been going on at Civitas. But there's one really big international event that has happened in the last couple days. In the United Kingdom, there's a new prime minister, and his name is Boris. And
no Russian collusion.
No Russian collusion. The way this had to happen was maybe one of the most ridiculous turns of events that is, like, it was years in the making. It started off in 2015 when David Cameron had a general election against Ed Miliband, who was the leader of Labour. And a big issue of that campaign was leaving the EU. And David Cameron said that if he was elected, he'd hold a referendum to leave the EU. And all the exit polls said that Ed Miliband would win and David Cameron would be out of office. But something about the promise of holding a referendum really helped conservative turnout. And not only did David Cameron win the election, he won a majority when previously he'd had a coalition government with the centrist party, the Liberal Democrats. And then David Cameron had to follow through on holding the referendum. David Cameron, there are really like two parts of the Conservative Party in England. There are the Eurosceptics, and then there are the rest of them. And the Eurosceptics have been talking about leaving Europe since Maggie Thatcher was Prime Minister. But they never really had an opportunity in the last generation. There was a referendum years and years ago, but David Cameron was under the assumption that if he allowed people to vote, they would vote to stay in, and then it wouldn't matter. Because he was for remaining in the EU as well, and he campaigned on that. Boris Johnson, who had been mayor of London and had been an MP in Parliament, did not really have a clear position. He wrote an editorial that said that they should leave the EU, but he actually also wrote an editorial that said that they should stay in. And at the last moment, he decided to send in the one that said that they should leave out because he put his finger to the political winds and he figured out that there was really a momentum to leave the EU. And so he campaigned on Brexit, and then Brexit won 52-48. David Cameron had to resign because, of course, this was a failure that he did not anticipate. And when he resigned, the assumption was that Boris Johnson would be the next prime minister. This has been what Boris Johnson has been working for years and years. But Boris was backstabbed by several of his friends who decided that they were also going to run for prime minister. And so before he was set to announce, he decided not to announce. And then without Boris Johnson, there needed to be a consensus candidate. And out of the woodwork came Theresa May, who no one ever thought would be prime minister because, as we've seen over the last couple of years, she should not have been prime minister.
Yeah.
And she led a government with a majority, called the general election against Jeremy Corbyn because they were up by 20 points in the polls and there was an expectation that they would win a supermajority. Unfortunately for her, she called that election while wages were falling, and as wages were falling, so did her poll numbers, and she ended up losing her majority government and not having enough votes to pass her Brexit deal. And she resigned in shame. And Boris Johnson stepped back into the spotlight. And now he has won the Conservative leadership contest, and he is Prime Minister, and he has appointed what is probably the most right-wing government in Britain's modern history, if not the entirety of the history of Britain. His Foreign Secretary is a guy named Dominic Raab, who is kind of like American in his politics, like the culture war kind of thing. Like, he talks about how he's not a feminist and no one should be a feminist. his Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is a very important position that relates to the entirety of the economy of Britain, is Sajid Javid, who is very right-wing conservative politician, and the leader of the House of Commons now is Jacob Rees-Mogg, who may be one of the few politicians left in Britain who is anti-abortion and anti-gay marriage. And that's Boris Johnson's government. He's the Prime Minister now. We're going to see what happens.
So Brexit just got worse.
Brexit got worse.
Which is amazing because this has been going on since, like you said, 2014, and it got worse.
And so what's really bad is that everyone else who ran said that no deal, which would be they leave the EU without a deal, which would mean that there'd be no agreement on new borders with Northern Ireland, there'd be no trade agreements, there'd be no security for EU citizens living in Britain or vice versa. He said that if they can't get a good deal, he's willing to leave with no deal. He's the only one who said that, and now he is in Parliament, and Europe is not going to renegotiate another deal. He's got Theresa May's deal or no deal. And that's, there's really not a good outcome for the UK at this point unless they hold another kind of democratic event, like a general election or a referendum. But even then.
Which, the important thing that you just said there is the UK. So this isn't just Britain. Mm-hmm. This is Scotland, this is Wales, and Scotland voted to stay in the EU.
Pretty substantially.
Which is after they voted to stay in the UK, not as substantially. Mm-hmm. And so what Boris Johnson's government is now going to do is force all of these issues that Theresa May didn't have under the rug, but at least with the potential of a deal or maybe another vote on whether we should leave, or not us, whether the UK should leave or not.
The special relationship is so deep, we feel like we're also in the EU.
Well, give Donald Trump, watch Boris Johnson leave the EU with no deal, and all of a sudden the United Nations is no deal.
Well, here's what's in danger of happening to Boris Johnson. Parliament has said that they're not going to accept no deal. And if it looks like the new deadline is the 31st of October, Halloween, very spooky. If it looks like no deal is going to happen, then what could happen is that they'll force a vote of no confidence. There'll be a general election. And who knows what will happen, because now there's a new party, the Brexit Party, which is led by Nigel Farage, who is probably the most American politician in Britain, and that's not a compliment.
Didn't he fled?
He did flee somewhere.
I want to say Russia, but I think it was actually not. San Madrino, maybe?
Regardless.
He left.
He left. Problematic guy. Came to Alabama to campaign for Roy Moore once. That was weird. But his party is like either polling second or tied for first. And so if there were a general election, it's not really clear what would happen because, all democracies really, because of Duverger's law and a bunch of other political science terms, are kind of set up for two-party states. And so if you have three parties, each getting about a third of the vote, it's not really clear what the seats look like for that, or how you form a government, if you can form a government. So UK has really shot itself in the foot here by...
Well, that's been the problem with Brexit, is every problem the UK had with governing is now worse, because David Cameron had no idea what he was doing when famous last words, we're not going to leave, and now you're leaving and you have no plans, you did not think about this, you had no idea what that was going to look like, and then you gave it to Theresa May, who should not have had that, and now we've got Boris Johnson, who will just leave.
Who has no ideological mooring, he has no real, political history, theory rather, he exists for the purpose of Boris.
And the UK's government has just been Brexit for a year, longer than that now, which means that everything else that's going on there is not getting there's nobody dealing with anything. So even after they leave Brexit, the amount of work they're going to have to do to pull themselves back up,
if they can,
with no help from the EU, is going to be a job that I couldn't name a single British politician who could actually do the job.
I'd like to say Jeremy Corbyn, but I don't even know if that's true. But
I think with the fact that everyone's trying to make him flee.
Yeah, everyone's also trying to knife Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, which is, they have, Labor Party has the same issue the Democrats have, where you just turn on people at the slightest drop of a hat, and that's not how you win elections, and that's not how you get your party in charge.
Well, finally, we're going to talk about what we've been doing at Civitas, and then we're going to wrap up. We just recorded something called Civitalks, which is a very polite parody of our local political talk show, Donnybrook. And that was an experience. I learned a lot about all of my coworkers, where they stand on some issues and how they engage with one another when unprompted.
Because we did 2 different days, so we had
Yeah.
2 vaguely similar experiences, but also different in that you had different people talking.
Yeah. We talked a lot about ageism and how young voices are often left out of conversations. There was some disagreement on whether that is a good thing or not. But on the whole, what I thought was the most intriguing part of the entire experience was hearing everyone talk about St. Louis in particular, their experiences with the city, whether they love it or would like to leave it. And I thought you had some really insightful takes, Gabe as well. There were some others. Reasonable minds can differ. Wait a minute. What's the word I'm thinking of? Like I'm trying to keep the space in there so I can just clip it in. What is the word I'm thinking
For
of?
full...
Transparency? No.
What are you trying to say?
I'm trying to say that I'm looking at Claire. We're in the room with Claire, and that's why I'm saying what I'm saying.
For a full range of opinions?
No. I think I'm going to go with transparency. That feels full transparency. Today we are recording in the international headquarters of Civitas, so I'm directly looking at some of the people that I'm directing these comments towards. Claire Stolze is across the room. I met her. Katie Barefield's also here. Claire Shackelford. All of them had ranging from mild to spicy takes during Civitalks, and that's available on the Civitas blog. That is civitas-stl.com, student blog.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the St. Louis part was very interesting because we're all roughly the same age, so hearing about if you're going to come back or if you're going to leave and why is interesting. We both agree that you have to come back.
Got to come
to
back.
St. Louis. I don't know where else you would want to go, but some people disagree with that. I don't know why.
It's their right. It's your God-given right to be wrong. Josh Hawley's been exercising that for the last several years, and that is full circle. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening. Next time, Maggie will be back, and we're going to talk about the Democratic debates and whatever else happened in the week that was. I'm Reece.
I'm Sophie.
And this has been Provel Politics.